and welcome to everyone who's with us today for this first among many occasions on which we will be celebrating 5 years of our cultural journal, Guftugu.
And Guftugu and the Indian Cultural Forum were set up by the Indian Writers Forum 5 years ago. We had a twofold objective: to celebrate diversity and to resist the range of threats faced by our culture of free expression, dialogue, and debate, to insist on a secular, equal, and democratic republic. And that is why we are gathered here today, to celebrate living diversity and resistance.
And to mark this event today, we have with us feminist, writer, publisher Ritu Menon, Tamil writer and scholar Perumal Murugan, poet, performer, storyteller Danish Hussain, filmmaker Somnath Wagmare, digital artist Siddesh Gautam, who you might know as Bakery Prasad, and to moderate the session, one of the founding members of Guftugu and the Indian Cultural Forum, Geeta Hariharan. We also have performances at the end of this conversation, and we'll introduce them later. But for now, without much ado, over to you, Geeta.
Friends, we meet on a day that we must always remember, partly because of what happened all those decades back in 1948, but also because of what is happening today at the borders of Delhi, in Pune with the Elgar Parishad. So it is on a day like this that our speakers begin a conversation on the founding principles of our republic, and so our creative lives. And they present their unique takes on our common agenda: diversity, freedom of speech, freedom to dissent, and most of all, equality. Let me begin with Ritu Menon and ask her to speak about equality in terms of gender with all her years of experience, as well as perhaps talk glancingly about censorship, because this is also a project she's been involved in. Ritu.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you, Indian Cultural Forum and Guftugu. Thank you for being there. And thank you for making this day a day of reflection. And also, even in these times, a day of recall and to record the fact that we will always speak up and speak out. So, what I thought I would do is I'd speak a little bit right in the beginning about what I call the power of the word. And I will speak as somebody who has been working with writers, with books, as a sometime writer myself, and about what I think the power of the word does. And is prevented from doing. As writers, we live by words. Words are our currency. And like currency, the more they circulate, the greater their value. The more they challenge, the greater their subversive potential. And the more they subvert, the greater their danger. So censorship comes into place. And the power of the word is neutralized by the guarded tongue. Of course, the tongue is guarded much more for women than it is for others. And of course, even in this, there are several gradations, as we all know, and several experiences and several forms of censorship and of censoring. And this has something to do with the topic of equality as well, which I'll come to in a minute, but perhaps not in the direct way that we normally talk about it. And so the point that I want to make about the gendering and the censoring is that as far as women are concerned, the censorship is very seldom formal. Really, the state never needs to enter the picture. Their word is already and almost always already censored by family, by community, by convention, by religion, by society, by the market, by the literary establishment, and actually even by ourselves. So the question of culture, censorship, and voice, each of these is inseparable, and they are also undeniably gendered. Now, I just wanted to toss something out about what I think is important about a discussion on equality, which is that I think it is important for us to remember that equality means should mean not only the fact of being equal to, but the freedom to be different from. So how does this connect to what we write and how we experience our reality, let's say, just to begin with? What does it mean to be different from and to have the confidence and the equality to be different from whatever might be the norm, whatever it might be? As women, as writers, I don't want to go into the discussion of equality in general, but sticking to the word, let's say, to writing, to censorship, to the fact of all three. And so I just want to toss out something that perhaps we can come back to, or maybe we may not. But in the years that I've been dealing with women's writing, and perhaps even been struggling with it myself, are three things that I think recur in their writing and in their experience. And I'm going to name them: the metaphor of guilt, the metaphor of motherhood, and the metaphor of sexuality. I think all three are used to censor, to inhibit our writing, and to circumscribe our experience. Now, all three are ever present in very different registers and perhaps in very different idioms. But the challenge, I think, is to find the words to say it. And so what is the idiom that we can use? And is it different from or equal to? That, I think, has been the challenge, at least in a great deal of the work that we see, a great deal of the writing that we see by women, and perhaps in the attempts to forge another idiom, to prevent it from being censored.
Thank you, Ritu. That was a powerful start. If I may move on to Perumal Murugan with the same issue of censorship. Here, of course, censorship in the form of intimidation was not something abstract for Perumal Murugan, the way he was hounded for the English translation of his novel Madhur Bagan. But I also do not want to stop with censorship. I would like Murugan to also tell us about what diversity in actual practice is for a writer. The landscape, the culture, the folk tales, the parables. If you could speak about that, Murugan. Ram, if you could help us.
Thank you, Geeta. இந்த நிகழ்ச்சியை ஏற்பாடு செஞ்சிருக்கக்கூடிய இந்தியன் ரைட்டர்ஸ் ஃபோரம், அதுக்கு என்னுடைய நன்றியை தெரிவித்துக் கொள்கிறேன். வணக்கம். இலக்கியத்துக்கான ஒரு அடிப்படையை பத்தி பேசும்போது தமிழ் இலக்கண மரபு தான் எனக்கு ஞாபகம் வருது. தமிழ் இலக்கண மரபுல நிலம், பொழுது இந்த இரண்டை தான் முதன்மை என்று சொல்கிறார்கள். நிலம்ங்கிறது அதுக்கு இயற்கை அமைப்புக்கு ஏற்ப குறிஞ்சி, முல்லை, மருதம், நெய்தல், பாலை அப்படின்னு 5 வகையாக தமிழ் இலக்கியம் நிலத்தை பிரிக்கிறது. ஒவ்வொரு நிலத்திற்கும் ஏற்ற வகையில் மக்களினுடைய வாழ்க்கை முறை அமையும். பழக்க வழக்கங்கள், உணவு, உடை, சடங்குகள், நம்பிக்கைகள் என்று எல்லாமே ஒவ்வொரு நிலத்திற்கும் தனித்தன்மை கொண்டு இருக்கும். இந்தியாவை பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் ஒவ்வொரு 50 கிலோமீட்டருக்கும் அல்லது அதிகபட்சம் 100 கிலோமீட்டருக்கும் இடையில நில அமைப்பு மாறி இருக்கு. அதற்கேற்ற மாதிரி வாழ்க்கை முறையும் மாறுது. ஒரு ஆறு ஓடுச்சுன்னா ஆத்துக்கு இந்த கரையில ஒரு வாழ்க்கை, அந்த கரையில ஒரு வாழ்க்கை அப்படின்னு உண்டு. எங்க ஊர்ல ஒரு 10-20 வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னாடி எல்லாம் ஒரு பழமொழி போல ஒரு வழக்கு சொல்லுவாங்க. அக்கரைக்காரர்களுக்கு பொண்ணு கொடுக்க கூடாது என்று சொல்லுவாங்க. அது காரணம் என்ன அப்படின்னு சொன்னா, 2 கரையிலையும் வாழக்கூடியவர்கள் ஒரே ஜாதியாக இருந்தாலும் கூட பெண் கொடுக்க மாட்டாங்க. காரணம் என்ன? வாழக்கூடிய நில அமைப்பு வேறாக இருக்கும். அதனால ஒரு பெண் போய் ஒரு புதிய வாழ்க்கைக்கு பொருந்துவது என்பது கஷ்டம். அதனால திருமண வாழ்க்கையில கஷ்டங்கள் வரும் என்று கருதின காரணத்தினால ஏற்பட்ட வழக்கு இது அப்படின்னு பார்க்கலாம். இப்படி பலவிதமான வாழ்க்கை முறை நிலவுவதால் தான் இலக்கியத்துல, நம்முடைய இலக்கியத்தை, இந்திய இலக்கியத்தை பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் புதிய புதிய அனுபவங்கள் வந்து கொண்டே இருக்கின்றன. நீங்க பாத்தீங்கன்னா எல்லாமே எழுதிட்டத போல தோணும். ஆனா திடீர்னு புதுசு புதுசா எங்க இருந்தாவது ஒரு புது அனுபவம் வந்துடும். அது காரணம் என்ன அப்படின்னு சொன்னா, ஒரு குறிப்பிட்ட பகுதியை பத்தி எழுதுறதுதான் காரணம். குறிப்பிட்ட ஒரு பகுதியில் இருக்கக்கூடிய ஒரு சடங்கை பத்தி எழுதணும்னா அதை புதிய அனுபவமாக, ஒரு புதிய அறிதலாக கொண்டாடுவதுதான் வளர்ந்த சமூகத்தினுடைய இயல்பாக இருக்கும். ஆனா துரதிர்ஷ்டவசமா அத்தகைய பார்வை இப்ப நம்முடைய சமூகத்துல இல்லை. இலக்கியம் எப்போதும் புதிய அறிதல்களை நமக்கு வழங்கி கொண்டே இருக்கும். இலக்கியம் எப்போதும் அப்படித்தான், இலக்கிய வாசிப்பும் அப்படித்தான் அமைய வேண்டும். ஒரு நூலுக்குள் நுழையும் போது புதிய வாழ்க்கை ஒன்றுக்குள் நுழைகிறோம் என்னும் புரிதல், அதை அறியும் ஆவல், ஆர்வம், இதெல்லாம் வேணும். ஆனா இங்க அப்படிப்பட்ட ஒரு வாசிப்பு முறையே இல்லை. புதிதாக வரக்கூடிய எந்த ஒன்னையுமே எதிர்க்கக்கூடிய மனோபாவம் தான் நம்மிடம் இருக்கிறது. புது விதமான ஒரு சடங்கை பற்றி எழுதணும்னா உடனே அதை பொதுவாக்கி நாம கொண்டிருக்கக்கூடிய நடுத்தர வர்க்க விழுமிய பார்வை இருக்கு பாருங்க, வேல்யூஸ், அந்த விழுமிய பார்வைக்குள்ள அடக்கி இது இந்த சமூகத்தை இழிவுபடுத்துது, இவர்களை இழிவுபடுத்துது, கடவுளை இழிவுபடுத்துது, மதத்தை இழிவுபடுத்துது என்று கூறி எதிர்க்கும் போக்கு அதுதான் வலிமை பெற்று வருகிறது. இதுக்கு, இந்த போக்குக்கு சாதி, மதம், மொழி, இனம் என எதெல்லாம் தனக்கு வசதியோ அதை எல்லாவற்றையும் துணைக்கு அழைத்துக் கொள்கிறது. சகல வகையான படைகளையும் திரட்டி கொண்டு எழுத்தை இந்த விழுமியம் எதிர்க்கிறது. இலக்கியத்திற்குள் புதிய வரவை இந்த போக்கு தடுக்கிறது. புதிய பார்வைகளை இது அவமதிக்கிறது. இலக்கியம் நடுத்தர வர்க்கம் ஏற்றுக்கொண்ட விழுமியங்களை போற்றுவதாக மட்டும்தான் இருக்கணும் என்று நிர்பந்திக்கிறது. கடவுளை போற்ற வேண்டும், மதத்தை போற்ற வேண்டும், ஜாதியை போற்ற வேண்டும் என்று கூட கேட்குது. பனிப்படலம் போல இந்த அளவுகோல் எல்லா இடத்திலும், நடுத்தர வர்க்க விழுமியங்களே அளவுகோலாக எல்லா இடத்திலும் ஆக்கிரமித்துக் கொண்டிருக்கின்றன. இது இலக்கிய மலர்ச்சியை முடக்கும் செயல்னு நான் பார்க்கிறேன். இதை இலக்கிய ரீதியாக எதிர்கொள்வது எப்படி அப்படிங்கிறது தான் இன்றைக்கு எழுத்தாளர்கள் முன் உள்ள சவால்னு நினைக்கிறேன். கீதா மாதுருபாகனை குறிப்பிட்டாங்க. மாதுருபாகன் அனுபவத்தின் மூலமாக நான் நினைக்கக்கூடிய விஷயம் இதுதான். நன்றி.
Thank you, Murugan. So he begins by thanking the ICF and Guftugu for organizing this event. On the subject of censorship in terms of regional literature, Murugan says that the Tamil literary tradition, when speaking about the fundamentals of literature, primarily foregrounds two things: land and time. When it comes to land, it is typically categorized into 5 different kinds of terrain: Kurunji, Mullai, Maridam, Neidal, and Palai. And the ways of life of people in each of these terrain are quite distinct. Each terrain is very different in terms of the behavior, the food, the clothing, the rituals, the beliefs of its inhabitants. When it comes to India, it could be 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers at the max, sometimes even less. That's all it can take for the terrain and for a way of life to change, sometimes quite drastically. He says where there is a river, there is a certain way of life on one side, and there could be quite a different one on the other. He brings up this sort of old saying that used to be common in his village 20 years ago, which roughly translated means don't forge marital ties with those on the other side of the world. And this was influenced less by religion or differences in community, and more by the knowledge that even that seemingly small distance would lead to a terrain. And with that, a new way of life. And families in this village would worry that their members would face hardship as a result of such a change. He brings up this adage of sorts to emphasize this awareness of just how short a distance it can take before people find themselves in a starkly different environment. He says it is because such myriad ways of life exist in this country that new experiences keep getting revealed through literature. In an enlightened society, if you speak of a ritual in one region, he feels, it would be received in others as a new experience and celebrated as a fresh perspective on life. But he feels that that mindset is not predominant in our country today. Literature, he says, is an art form that keeps delivering new understandings to us. And that is the perspective we must take when encountering it. When we enter a new book, we must have the awareness that we are being introduced to a new way of life, and we must have the eagerness to understand it. But that kind of approach to reading is not commonly seen here, is his observation. He says that the prevalent mindset in this country is to oppose anything and everything new. When one writes about new ways of life, the tendency is to sort of generalize it or to suppress it within mainstream sort of middle class values and pronounce it as disgraceful or degrading if it deviates from that. This trend, he feels, is gaining strength today, and it exploits divides along the lines of caste, religion, language, and race. It assembles many different kinds of forces and opposes attempts at new writing, which they feel crosses traditional structures of God or religion or caste. It hinders the emergence of new voices in literature, and in a way, it even insults new perceptions. It mandates that all literature should only reinforce middle and upper class values. He says that, like mist, these values are encroaching upon every space and setting themselves as the only acceptable benchmark for artistic expression. This situation, he says, debilitates the flowering of literature. And he says how to give voice to this within the framework of literature is the challenge that writers today face.
Thank you so much, Ram. Thank you, Murugan. Well equipped to advise us all on how to withstand pressure from censors. I thought that we should, in these times where unlikely people have captured the word narrative from all of us. Narrative, counter-narrative. We even have the Delhi police speaking expertly of narratives and narrative making. I thought I would ask Danish Hussain, who has a long and rich relationship with the story, what is a creative?
Oh, sorry. I lost you. I hope it is not.
That the powers that be want to push as the only story?
Well, if we kind of analyze and look at storytelling, Geeta, uh, the in the very seed of storytelling there is dissent, in the sense that when you think of why and how anyone would have planted the first story, the very act of planting a story was that whatever was happening, whatever was the order of things, one wanted to challenge that. And in order to challenge that, one had to create a narrative, and that narrative was planted. And then subsequently, people bought that narrative, and that narrative became like the widely held belief, which resulted in the older order getting displaced by the newer order. So if we understand storytelling is subversive, it has dissent in its seed, and this is how it works. It replaces one set of narrative with the other set of narrative. Now, what has happened in last 2 or 3 decades or 4 decades, the rise of neoliberalism, is that uh, the liberal order that was created, the narrative of democracy, the narrative of equality, the narrative of prosperity, the narrative of growth, no matter how much it may seem to us a very altruistic kind of an agenda, but there were holes in that. And one of the holes was that when you live on a finite planet, you cannot have an infinite growth. The other was the hypocrisy of the people who were in power. For all the good thing that they espoused and for all the good things that they said, their actions were not meeting their words, were not matching their words. And the gap between those who were getting wealthy or those who managed to cross into the elite order, the bureaucrats, the politicians, they were creating barriers for others to come in, to such an extent that dissatisfaction was increasing. And one set of people caught on to that dissatisfaction, planted their own narrative, and that narrative subsequently uh, became whatever we are seeing it today. So the point is this, that not everyone was a hypocrite, not everyone was following that agenda with the intention of not creating inequality. But when at mass levels narratives get displaced, uh, it is very difficult to distinguish between what's right and what is wrong, who is right and who is wrong. And a lot of time we do find that people uh, who don't deserve uh, the punishment that they are getting are the actual ones who start getting the punishment. But because those whose agenda was only to live off what was happening, they quietly skulk away. And those who are left on the forefront are actually the people who believed in the ideas. And that's what we are seeing, that people today who are suffering, who are in the jail, in various jails, are actually the people who believed in the idea of equality, who believed in the idea of an inclusive society, and they are the one who are facing the brunt. Uh, I do not see anyone from the old order or from the previous governments or from the previous establishment or elites actually suffering. So what we need to really look at is understand how the narrative of the people who have hijacked everything is working, and understand how we can create more rightful narratives, more rightful stories, for people to realize that everybody is being hoodwinked, and we need a better set of stories, a better set of narratives to conquer back the imagination if we want to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a brief story, Danish. I think that from performance, if we move to another very powerful medium of our times, film, and let me ask Somnath, whose films have given us kind of eyewitness reports of what is happening, of the burning issues of the day. But if Somnath could tell us about film as a weapon, as a thrust for equality, particularly caste equality, the caste movement.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. Basically, our caste is there. Caste is not invisible in Indian cinema. but caste Indian cinema. Basically, Indian cinema is stories of dominant caste who get the benefit of historical caste system, and mostly Bollywood or any regional industries, most privileged castes are dominated our cinema industry, and so there is a differences between the caste invisibility of caste and Dalit stories. Actually, there is very few. Well, Dalit stories are very mini minority in our society and our film industry, basically. And there is very interesting report on Dalit representation on cinema, mostly on Bollywood. So that report is very interesting because every year Hollywood they are publishing a diversity report, and they are mostly that report is about the black representation on U.S. cinema. But if we plan that type of diversity report, uh, what is the actual condition of our cinema? It's come on public. So basically, I mentioned the report on the Hindu. They are publishing a report. Basically, it's a news report, and that report is saying there is a very few there is a very almost 5 films in 2013 to 2015, and almost that 3 years 400 films produce a Bollywood, so-called progressive industry, and mostly the filmmakers from privileged caste, and mostly that there is no differences of parallel and mainstream cinema, because the parallel filmmakers they are more casteist, because they are making the film like Achut Kanna and Sujata, and they are showing Dalit as a victim, and they are showing their own caste people, and mostly the Bollywood, they are romanticizing Gandhi's idea of Harijan, or the Gandhi's ideas, but they are completely ignore the leader, the progressive, the anti-caste leaders like Phule or Periyar uh, or Mahatma Phule, and they are showing, they are completely ignoring. And if like a film like Article 15, made by Anubhav Sinha, and he mostly actually Bollywood is like a Article 15, because they are romanticizing their own privileged caste people. So I think Bollywood and most the Indian cinema, because Dalit Bahujan communities are, the population of Dalit Bahujan communities in Indian societies almost 85%, and their representation is very low. That's why I think Indian cinema, there is a caste stories, but that caste, because every cinema is a caste stories. We don't say this is not caste is invisible. I think we need to say Dalit stories are invisible, and we need two filmmakers like Nagraj Manjure and Pa Ranjit, because they are making the global films on caste issues. So I think we mostly the cinema industry need a diversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I wonder if I could add a little question. I'm tempted to ask about a question. Now, the film is something that reaches such a large number of people. So, do you have any ideas for how movements can use films beyond the commercial space?
Actually, if we compare why Tamil industry made a film like a Kala, because there is a movement, because cinema industry is a very costly industry, and mostly this, the Bania caste, they are mostly, who are the producer, film producer in Indian film industry, mostly is Bania. So I think mostly the movement, progressive movement, we need to produce our documentaries, our short films, and mostly the crowdfunding films, and support. I think we need to support most marginal communities filmmakers, because this marginal community stories are very low in industry.
I think that's a very useful reminder. And, in a way, we're moving from the abstract where we're sitting alone and writing or even performing for a small group to this larger sort of audience. And how do we actually use our work for to support movements? I also want to add, of course, that we live in a multilingual nation, and though we are talking in English, and though writers are bound by the languages they write in, that film and art can use all kinds of language. I think it's important to mention that. Thank you so much, Somnath. And your films actually help us to understand the difference that Murugan is suggesting we embrace. If I could move on to perhaps the newest medium, especially for some of us who are older but are anxious to keep up. We have Siddesh Gautam with us, also called intriguingly Bakery Prasad. And he works with digital art, but also graphic novels. So, we live in the age of the internet, which had a great deal of potential for a democracy, for speaking up, but also we know is something of the wild land with trolls and people saying all kinds of things. So if you could tell us a little about how the visual language of protest, especially in sites like social media, how do we see a real future for this? How do people respond? Does it help movements?
Thanks, Geeta, and thanks, ICF, for letting me speak. Today is Rohit's birthday, Rohit Vimula's birthday. So, I would, start speaking, with this way of thinking. So, I would, answer a question with somehow going back to the whole concept of humanity. As I'll start from the cave, where the cave people first decided to draw, and they were hunters and gatherers, and there were some people who were drawing, and the what they were drawing was what they were seeing around them. So they were drawing bulls, and these bulls had really nice curves. It felt like it is something which is going to be juicy, or might be edible or something. They drew horses, and you can see them in India. You do not have to go far. You can go to Madhya Pradesh and Bhimbetka and just go inside and see these observations that these cave people first started to document in a way. So this is unlike how various religions and kingdoms claim that they were started in cave, and they do not have any proof of it. Art actually emerged from these caves, and since they were drawing these juicy bulls and these exotic animals, larger than life, larger than themselves, they were also drawing these animals who because of whom they were vulnerable, animals such as lions and other carnivorous animals, and they would not forget making those sharp teeth. So you see how they are giving character to different things that they are observing around. From there, they decided to settle down, and then when they settled down, they continued to draw. There was no superpower that came, that spoke to them, that you have to draw for the love of God or anything. There was no scripture written back then, so they were just drawing because this was the most human thing that they could do. They settled, they made farms, but they kept drawing. They settled into tribes. They drew for communities. They drew for their own tribe. They drew the laws of their tribes. But they continue to draw, on the walls of their houses, of their huts. as we move forward, religions were established and kingdoms were established, but people continue to draw. Even in the Roman Empire, when what we call propaganda was at the highest, there were people, whom we now call graffiti artists, would just go in these noble houses and palaces and these, public, in these property of kings, and they would do graffiti around, over it. So but they still do for the kings and for the religions as well. We move forward. We saw this new word coming up. We saw an enlightenment era. We somehow started to break through the shackles of our masters, who were, because of whom, because under whose lashes we were actually working. So we actually started to enlighten ourselves, and it happened in different parts of the world. And soon technology came, industrialization came, and people thought that some people will be free, and then new technological slaves actually entered. But then artists actually got a bit of freedom from their masters, who were keeping them under their lashes for their own propaganda. And but later we saw printing press. Now the printing press was first conceived by only the noble people or the high position people, but then later, it during the Great Wars, we see that there were publishing houses that were being run from the from the basement of houses. So there were small printing machines that came out, and there were pamphlets, there were posters, and there were dissent, which was now very common. Now people can be anonymous about their dissent as well. Now they do not have to take this very high risk of going out and writing on the wall and vandalizing the public property, which was morally wrong as per a lot of people. With printing press, soon everybody was allowed to read and everybody was allowed to get educated. So you see on your table, you have Socrates, you have Plato, you have Confucius, you have Buddha, you have Gramsci, you have Nietzsche, you have Ambedkar, you have Baldwin, you have everybody, you have all the free thinkers. Now you the cave person that you were once drawing those things which looked tasty or edible to you, and things that were dangerous for you, they followed their same instinct. And now we are not we are not vulnerable from lions. We have just digits of lions left in the places where they used to rule. So now the evil has changed, but we are the same cave people. We are the same people with the same mentality, and it's only natural that we draw what we see evil to us. And now that evil is this concept of equality, because men, uh, people have been through, everybody around the world have been through this long suppression, long oppression of giving out their ideas. There were witch hunters in the West, but in India also, the Dalits would not be allowed to read scriptures. So there was a huge amount of people who were kept away from knowledge. And now, since that knowledge is being given to a lot of people, it's only natural that they will uh, make what is evil according to them and what is good according to them. Now, I find it very natural. One thing that I find unnatural is when people, sit inside their thick walls without windows, and they draw these, high breed pets and exotic plants, and while their neighbor's house is burning, and I find that unnatural. So I think it is inevitable that our masters, they are still masters. So these masters will not let go of us so easily. And you can see in the West, in US, there are recent protests of faculties from our department, because they're not hiring uh, uh, more people in the universities for permanent jobs. They're not giving them proper remunerations for the work. So there are a lot of freelance academicians who are in arts, who are who do not have any benefits, any permanent benefits as an academician that like anybody else. But I think people are afraid, because artists are the people who are just honest about what is evil and what is friendly, or what is what is not evil. What so this distinction is, everybody can see. If you're an artist, if you're an artist truly from the heart, you know that something wrong is happening. You have twice or thrice more emotions. So when you see a child having kwashiorkar, with really thin hands and legs, and then this really fat belly, and you see those people in on the street, and if that doesn't break your heart, if that doesn't make you observe and point out that evil which has made that happen. So I think you're not an artist. You're just a clerk. You're just somebody who has got a skill, and you're just earning money out of that skill. You're not thinking beyond it. So I think this is a very natural process that we are going through, and I know that we are going to get lashes from the masters, but we have no other choice. It's a continuous struggle for us, and I think this is the only way we can survive.
Thank you so much, Siddhesh, because that is an excellent roundup in the sense of reminding us that to be an artist in whatever medium, that we need that connect, not only with past histories, to understand how we have reached where we have with the inequalities, old and new, as well as the resistance, the movement for equality. And as he puts it very eloquently, we keep our windows wide open. Somnath told us that it's not caste that is invisible in our films. It is the voices of those who are at the receiving end of caste inequality. I think that's a very important distinction. Danish Hussain, as always, has given us a good context in which to view our stories, and that a story is of necessity an expression of dissent, because it asks you to imagine. And as we know, imagination is the enemy of all those who are on the right-wing side and who only see one story. Perumal Murugan, who has written such a variety of stories, asks us to swim across, go to the other bank, embrace the other side. And Ritu Menon, out of years of experience as a publisher and writer and in the women's movement, reminds us that there is a very clear link between intimidation, censorship, the government of the tongue with your gender or your caste. Thank you so much. Such a wide variety of speakers, each one in a different medium, but all of them tied together by the fact that they are citizens of conscience. Thank you so much. And I think we'll have our colleagues in the Indian Cultural Forum introduce the performances for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. That was quite an engaging conversation. As part of this celebration, we also have shared some videos with curated works from the journal. Please do check it out. You'll find it on the Facebook pages.
Thank you, Danya. Let's now move on to our performances section and welcome lyricist, poet, and a very outspoken voice against injustice, Hussain Haidari, after a few seconds.
पेशे से एक शायर हूँ, एक लेखक हूँ, एक गीतकार हूँ। तो अभी जो बात चली, जो सोमनाथ कह रहे थे और गीता और सोमनाथ जो बात कर रहे थे, उससे कॉन्टेक्स्ट में मैंने एक पोएम लिखी है। आई गेस उनकी बातों से कॉन्टेक्स्ट क्लियर है किस बारे में बात हो रही है, तो मेरे ख्याल से मुझे कविता का कॉन्टेक्स्ट बताना ज़रूरी नहीं लगता है। आई थिंक आपको पोइट्री से समझ में आ जाएगा मैं क्या बात कर रहा हूँ। दिस पोएम इज कॉल्ड, हिंदी कविता है ये, हम फिर नहीं लिख पाए। हम फिर नहीं लिख पाए। हम झेल रहे हैं दुख, हम झेल रहे हैं दुख, और वे कागज कलम इकट्ठे कर लिखना शुरू कर चुके हैं हमारे ही दुख की कहानी। हम झेल रहे हैं दुख और वे कागज कलम इकट्ठे कर लिखना शुरू कर चुके हैं हमारे ही दुख की कहानी। गढ़े जा चुके हैं किरदार, बुने जा चुके हैं प्लॉट, बेचा जा चुका है एक प्रोजेक्ट जिसकी पहली फ्रेम है तय। सत्य घटनाओं पर आधारित एक काल्पनिक प्रस्तुतिकरण। हम झेल रहे होंगे दुख जब बना देंगे वे इस पर एक फिल्म, जिसमें नहीं होंगे हम कहानीकार, नहीं होंगे हम निर्देशक, नहीं होंगे हम निर्माता, नहीं होंगे हम अभिनेता, नहीं होंगे हम कैमरामैन, नहीं होंगे हम संगीतकार, नहीं होंगे हम स्पॉट बॉय या एक्स्ट्रा भी, या स्पॉट बॉय और एक्स्ट्रा तो होंगे शायद। और जीत जाएगी वो फिल्म नेशनल अवार्ड के मेडल, फिल्म फेयर की ट्रॉफियां, यूरोप का भ्रमण, ऑस्कर का नामांकन, बॉक्स ऑफिस की सफलता यानी चमकती हुई शोहरत और खनकती हुई दौलत। हम झेल रहे होंगे दुख और कर देंगे दुख में फेसबुक पर एक छिछला सा विरोध कि नहीं था हमारा दुख तुम्हारी कला की खदान, जिसमें बनाकर हमें ही मजदूर तुमने निकाल लिया सोना और बना लिए अपने लिए जेवर। हम झेल रहे होंगे दुख और मढ़ा जाएगा दोष हमारे ही सर कि हम हैं बौखलाए हुए अतिवादी, पीड़ित मानसिकता से ग्रस्त, भरे हुए कड़वाहट से, रोष से और मलाल से कि ना कर पाए कुछ खुद, और लगा रहे हैं उल्टा भला करने वालों पर इल्जाम कि होता है हर कलाकार होता है हर कला पर तो हर कलाकार का एक जैसा अधिकार। हम झेल रहे होंगे दुख जब फिर से हार जाएंगे ये बहस, नहीं समझा पाएंगे किसी को भी कि हम झेल रहे थे दुख। अपना शरीर, अपनी इंद्रियां, अपना संकल्प, अपनी ऊर्जा, अपना चित्त, अपनी आत्मा को दुख में पूरा झोंक कर कि डुबाया जा रहा था हमें, हमारी गर्दन को दबोच कर दुख के पानी में बार बार छटपटा रहे थे लेने को सांस, और तब नहीं था मुमकिन कागज कलम को याद करना। हम फिर हार जाएंगे बहस और मांग लेंगे माफी, इतिहास में हमारा विरोध कहलाया जाएगा अपवाद या एक अतिशयोक्ति या सिर्फ एक बहाना कि हम झेलते ही रह गए दुख और कभी नहीं लिख पाए अपने दुख की कहानी अपनी जबानी। तो ये जो अप्रोप्रिएशन का जो डिस्कशन हुआ था सोमनाथ और गीता के बीच में, तो मैं भी काफ़ी, मुझे एज अ राइटर बहुत कचोटता है, ये बहुत गुस्सा दिलाता है जब मैं ये स्क्रीन पे देखता हूँ जो भी डिस्कशन हुआ फिल्म के बारे में और इस तरह की फिल्मों के बारे में। तो मैंने बहुत उसके ऊपर एक कविता लिखी थी। एक जो दानिश साहब जो बात कर रहे थे और गीता मैम बात कर रहे थे कि जो नैरेटिव है वो किस तरह फ्रेम होता है, तो एक तरह का नैरेटिव जो हमेशा मैं देखता हूँ फ्रेम होते हुए, whenever the state attacks the people, there is the primary violence is of the oppression of the state to its people, but the secondary violence that occurs जो retaliation में होता है of the people because they are pushed in a corner and it is for survival that they do it, तो उसे भी equal दर्जा दे देते हैं, and then a certain narrative of both sidism starts happening। तो मुझे इस बोथ साइडिज्म से बड़ी तकलीफ होती है, मतलब मुझे लगता है क्योंकि बराबरी की लड़ाई नहीं है, आप स्टेट बहुत माइटी पावरफुल है, उससे चंद लोग लड़ रहे हैं और उसमें हम बोथ साइडिज्म लगा देते हैं कई बार। तो जो इस तरह के नैरेटिव को प्रमोट करते हैं, इस तरह के बोथ साइडिज्म को, खासकर इस केस में, मतलब जो व्हेन स्टेट वर्सेस पीपल होता है वो भी वेरी फ्यू पावरलेस पीपल, तो ऐसे लोगों को मैं दोगला कहता हूँ, टू फेस्ड। दिस पोएम इज कॉल्ड दोगले, उर्दू की नज्म है ये, दोगले। ये दास्तानों को बुनने वाले, ये एक रास्ता न चुनने वाले, ये दोनों तरफों की कहने वाले, ये बीच में जाके रहने वाले, तमाम दुनिया के सामने अब सबक मोहब्बत का दे रहे हैं। ये दास्तानों को बुनने वाले, ये एक रास्ता न चुनने वाले, ये दोनों तरफों की कहने वाले, ये बीच में जाके रहने वाले, तमाम दुनिया के सामने अब सबक मोहब्बत का दे रहे हैं। ये कह रहे हैं कि जो हुआ है वो हो गया है, सो भूल जाओ। ये कह रहे हैं कि जो दुकानें, जो दिल जले हैं, वो भूल जाओ। ये कह रहे हैं कि घर में घुसकर सितम जो ढाए, वो भूल जाओ। ये कह रहे हैं कि जो है कातिल, अब उनके नामों को भूल जाओ। ये कह रहे हैं कि दफन कराओ सारी लाशों को खामोशी से। ये कह रहे हैं कि अब दबा दो तमाम चीखों को खामोशी से। ये कह रहे हैं कि अब सड़क पर उतरना रातों को खामोशी से। ये कह रहे हैं कि सुनते जाओ अमन की बातों को खामोशी से। ये दुख पे मेरे ना रोने वाले, ये वक्त पढ़ने पे खोने वाले, ये मुस्कुरा के मुकरने वाले, ये खौफ खा खा के डरने वाले, तमाम दुनिया के सामने जो सबक मोहब्बत का दे रहे हैं, मैं आपसे कह रहा हूं यारो, ये दोगले है, ये दोगले है। ये चाहते हैं कि जालिमों के जो जुल्म है वो ना हम गिनाएं। ये चाहते हैं हर एक इल्जाम को बराबर ही बांटा जाए। ये चाहते हैं तबाहियों पर सवाल कोई भी ना उठाए। ये चाहते हैं उदासियों पर ज्यादा मातम भी ना मनाएं। ये चाहते हैं कि इनके दामन पे खून के दाग लग न जाएं। ये चाहते हैं कि जिक्र इंसाफ का कहीं पर ना होने पाए। पुरानी चालाकी है ये इनकी, ये किस्से हम पहले सुन चुके हैं। रफा दफा कर रहे जो मसला, ये शर्म और डर से भर गए हैं। खड़े थे कातिल का साथ देने, ये बात अब ये भी जानते हैं। लहू की सुनवाई हो न जाए, सो हाथ पहले ही धो रहे हैं। ये अब जो बदनाम हो रहे हैं, ये अब जो तारीख में लुट रहे हैं, ये आप इज्जत ही खो चुके हैं। ये एक ही बात कह रहे हैं, ये दोगले है, ये दोगले है, ये दोगले है, ये दोगले है। तो बहुत शुक्रिया इंडियन कल्चरल फोरम का और आप सभी लोगों का, पैनलिस्ट का। आई गेस मेरा टाइम इतना ही था। अपर्णा, ओवर टू यू।
Thank you, Hussein. We are now approaching the end of this evening, and we will leave you with a steadfast solidarity. And to finish off, two incredible performances by Revanta and Mallika Sarabhai, which are incisive examples of how a traditional form like Bharatnatyam can challenge the caste and gender status quo. So over to the videos.
Hi, my name is Revanta Sarabhai. For centuries, Bharatanatyam has been a medium to communicate stories from Indian mythology through song, dance, and drama. Traditionally, Bharatanatyam has thousands of poems that exude a sense of bhakti or devotion, but often at the risk of glossing over certain problematic aspects of Hinduism. Take the story of Nandanar, for example. A great Shiva devotee, Nandanar was never allowed into a temple because he was born a low caste, an untouchable. Century after century, as Nandanar's story is retold, people praise him and say, even though he was not allowed into the temple, see how strong his devotion is. Isn't it time we ask the question, why is he not allowed into the temple? The famous song Varuhalamo by Gopal Krishna Bharati tells the story of Nandanar in first person, where essentially he is pleading Lord Shiva, begging him to be allowed into the temple just once so that he may get a glimpse of the deity. Century after century, as the story is retold, all of them have Nandanar accepting his fate lying down. But what about the Nandanars of today? I'd like to present to you my interpretation of this song, Varuhalamo, with a different ending, perhaps trying to question the status quo with regards to caste today.
தவறோ பிழையோ காதல் தவறோ பிழையோ காதல் தவறோ பிழையோ காதல் கண்ணா 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 நீ சொல் தவறோ பிழையோ காதல் கண்ணா 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 நீ சொல் தவறோ பிழையோ காதல் பழி பாவம் நிறைந்த புவி தன்னிலே பழி பாவம் நிறைந்த புவி தன்னில் நேயம் காதல் பாசம் யாவும் தவறோ பழி பாவம் நிறைந்த புவி தன்னில் நேயம் காதல் பாசம் யாவும் தவறோ தாய் செய்யிடை காதல் காதலரிடை காதல் தாய் செய்யிடை காதல் காதலரிடை காதல் தாய் செய்யிடை காதல் தாய் செய்யிடை காதல் காதலரிடை காதல் காதலரிடை காதல் ஈருயிருடை தோன்றி வளரும் நேசம் காதல் பாசம் யாவும் ஈருயிருடை தோன்றி வளரும் நேசம் காதல் பாசம் யாவும் தவறோ சாதித தனி பதகா மனித மாகரி சமாகரி சரி சனி தவ மகம பதனி அவளி வலிடையோர் பால் காதல் அவளி வலிடையோர் பால் காதல் காதல் அவளி வலிடையோர் பால் காதல் காதல் அவனியும் பழுத்திடுமே அவமானம் செய்திடுமே விரட்டி விரட்டி துரத்திடுமே அவனியும் பழுத்திடுமே அவமானம் செய்திடுமே விரட்டி விரட்டி துரத்திடுமே இது சரியோ இது முறையோ முறையிடுவேன் கண்ணா பாபம் நிறைந்த புவி தனிலே நேயம் காதல் பாசம் தான் தவறு ஆண் பெண்ணிடம் காதல் ஆண் பெண்ணிடம் காதல் ஆண் பெண்ணிடம் காதல் வரின் ஆயிரம் கேள்விகள் வையகம் கேட்டிடுமே ஆண் பெண்ணிடம் காதல் வரின் ஆயிரம் கேள்விகள் வையகம் கேட்டிடுமே குலம் கோத்திரம் என்ன மத ஜாதியும் என்ன குலம் கோத்திரம் என்ன மத ஜாதியும் என்ன வழிபடும் தெய்வமும் என்ன இனமென்ன நிறமென்ன வழிபடும் தெய்வமும் என்ன ஆயிரம் கேள்விகள் வையகம் கேட்டிடுமே கல்லால் அடித்திடுவார் தீக்கிரையாக்கிடுவார் தலையை சீவிடுவார் கல்லால் அடித்திடுவார் தீக்கிரையாக்கிடுவார் தலையை சீவிடுவார் மத தர்மம் எனும் போர்வையுடன் தர்மம் எனும் போர்வையுடன் தர்மம் எனும் போர்வையுடன் ஐயகோ 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 இக்கொடுமை யாரிடம் சொல்வேன் இக்கொடுமை யாரிடம் சொல்வேன் தூளியில் நீ இருந்தால் மங்கை ராதையின் காதலனாய் தூளியில் நீ இருந்தால் மங்கை ராதையின் காதலனாய் பார்வடியின் சிறு பாலகன் நீ பருவம் எய்திய மடந்தையுடன் வசமாய் தூளியில் நீ இருந்தாய் கண்ணாவும் காதல் அது தெய்வீகம் கண்ணாவும் காதல் அது தெய்வீகம் புகழ் பாடுது மூவுலகம் கண்ணாவும் காதல் அது தெய்வீகம் பரிசுத்தமான நேயத்துடன் ராதை போல் நான் இருக்க சுத்தமான நேயத்துடன் ராதை போல் நான் இருக்க கல்லால் அடிபடுதல் முறையோ இழி சொல்லால் வசப்படுதல் முறையோ வழிகாட்டிடும் தெய்வம் நீ கண்ணா ஒளி பாய்ந்திட வருவாய் என் மன்னா வழிகாட்டிடும் தெய்வம் நீ கண்ணா ஒளி பாய்ந்திட வருவாய் என் மன்னா மீண்டும் நேய வாழ்வினையை காட்டிடுவாய் விளையாடும் கலையதனும் புகட்டிடுவாய் மீண்டும் நேய வாழ்வினையை காட்டிடுவாய் விளையாடும் கலையதனை புகட்டிடுவாய் நேயம் காதல் பாசம் என்றும் பகை வெறுப்பினை வென்றிடவே நேயம் காதல் பாசம் என்றும் பகை வெறுப்பினை வென்றிடவே காதல் வென்றி